as we do every week. So for those of you who are jumping on, just a quick reminder, please locate your control bar, which is at the bottom of your web browser window, and please take note of those two very important icons on the control bar. Number one, chat. This is where you will enter in anything you want to share so that you can interact with your fellow attendees. Just please make sure if you are typing something in that you want everybody to see, that you go to the drop-down menu there and select all panelists and attendees. The chat area is also where we will be periodically dropping links to the resources that our presenter is going to share today. So be on the lookout for that, as well as your certificate of attendance. And as usual, 24 hours after this broadcast concludes, you will receive an email with the recording and all of the linked resources. The other thing you need to pay attention to is that Q&A area. This is where you should place questions either for Saddleback or for Dr. McKnight today. So that way we can help you and address those questions. If not as soon as they come in, then toward the end of the webinar today, as we have our Q&A portion of our time together. We'll get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern time. As usual, while you are waiting, go ahead and go to Twitter, please. Follow us. Here you have the Twitter information for both Saddleback and Dr. Catherine McKnight. Let everybody know that you are joining us today. So let's check in with Dr. McKnight. How are you today?
Awesome. I just saw that one of my former MAT students is online today, the awesome Gerald Cheney. He's a teacher in Evanston, Illinois. So I just gave him a shout out. So yeah, really happy to see everybody here.
Wonderful. Let's see. Go ahead to the chat area. Let us all know where you're joining us from. That's the fun part. And as we're waiting for 3 o'clock to come around, we want to see where everybody's joining us from. I see we've got Washington, we got Florida, Wyoming, Edmonton, Texas, Massachusetts.
Oh, so if we have Edmonton, then we're officially international today.
We are. We're officially international. That's right. Yes.
Yay. Oh my gosh. Now it's really moving fast here. Everybody's letting us know where they're from. I always refer to this as the romper room portion of the webinar. So those of you who don't know what romper room is, you need to go Google it, right? So those of you who are old timers like me know what I'm talking about. So
I know what that is too. So I guess maybe I shouldn't admit
Ukraine.
That.
We have somebody from Ukraine. That's awesome.
Nice.
Hello.
Welcome, everybody.
Sweet.
I love that. All right, let me go back to this. I do too.
Oh my gosh, what time is it in Ukraine? It's got to be close to what, 10 o'clock at night, and you're online. I'm impressed.
Okay, more Massachusetts, more Florida, lots of Texas, lots of New York. I just love this. It feels like we're all coming together to learn. Mm-hmm. I love it, love it, love it.
Yeah, and I use the hashtag once the everything went nuts mid-March. I started using the hashtag Nation of Educators because what what we're accustomed to do as educators is that if I have a question, I'm going to go on your classroom door, Liz, and I'll say, hey, did you get the memo about such and such? I don't know what to do. Or, did you do this with Canvas? Because I'm trying to figure it out. And we'd have those conversations in school, oftentimes, around coffee. And we don't have that now. And so I keep saying, we're just that nation of educators that we have to connect, among our own kind as well.
Absolutely. One of my friends told me, she's now an assistant principal, and she said, being an assistant principal or being a teacher in last spring when the shutdown happened, she said, it's like your job suddenly becomes all the stuff you don't like, the compliance, the paperwork, but you get none of or very little of the love and the relationship and the student interaction and the teacher interaction that you're used to on campus. And mm-hmm. she just was really missing that time with her coworkers and her students. And I'm sure you can all relate to that. So, all mm-hmm. right. Mm-hmm. It is 3 o'clock. It is time to jump in and get started. We are here today to talk about 4 ways to create effective e-learning. Now, this is for K-12. So if you're a first grade teacher, if you're a 12th grade teacher, or anywhere in between, you're going to get some good ideas today. And of course, we all need this information right now. We're all looking for tips and just good information on how we can continue to make this transition to effective e-learning. And with us To help us in this conversation today, we have Dr. Catherine McKnight, who this is not Dr. McKnight's first go around on a Saddleback webinar. She is back due to popular demand. I believe this is her third webinar with us, and she'll be back again next week for her fourth webinar with us. So many of you, I'm sure, already know Dr. McKnight from her previous sessions with us, but for those of you who don't, I will officially introduce her to you. So she is a dynamic presenter, dedicated teacher, and award-winning author. She began her career in education over 30 years ago as a middle school and high school English and social studies teacher in the Chicago Public Schools. In addition to speaking at professional development conferences, she is a regular consultant in schools and classrooms in the United States and internationally. She is the founder of Engaging Learners, an educational company built around her successful literacy and learning center model. Her work in educational leadership, literacy, and student skill development has resulted in unprecedented academic achievement in many struggling schools. She has received several awards for her publications and teaching at the university level. She has authored 20 books that support educational strategies to engage all learners, including The Teacher's Big Book of Graphic Organizers and Literacy and Learning Centers for the Big Kids, grades 4 through 12. And you may also know her from her morning meeting webinars, which she started during the COVID-19 pandemic as a weekly forum to bring everybody together and engage in professional learning. So thank you for being here. Welcome, Dr. McKnight. You can find her at engaginglearners.com or katherinemcknight.com, and she'll have her social media handles to share with you as well. So thank you again for being here, and please do take it away.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and show my screen, and there we go. And then while I'm doing that, I have a favor to ask all of our participants today, is that I can't walk and chew gum, so I'm trying to talk and start my PowerPoint at the same time. All right, so here's the deal. You see my Twitter handle at Literacy World, and if you tweet out about today's webinar with Saddleback, tag at Literacy World and Saddleback Publishing. You have to do both, and I'm going to pick the 3 best tweets, and I'm going to send you a book. And that's my way of just giving all of our colleagues some loving. So just remember that if you want a book, I will send you my Literacy and Learning Center book. You're gonna tweet us out and make sure that you have both of our tags on there, at Saddleback and at Literacy World, on the tweet to qualify for the fun. What teacher doesn't like books, right? And not only do teachers like books, but their favorite word is the word awesome. I hear that all the time in classrooms. Everything's awesome. So this is what we're going to be focusing on in the next hour, is that I'm going to share with you 4 ways to create effective e-learning in grades K through 12. And so this webinar is not about, here are 20 different Web 2.0 tools or apps that you can use in your classroom. This is about good teaching, and how do we translate good, effective teaching into a virtual learning, e-learning, digital learning, whatever you want to call it. But I guess it's a non-traditional, in-person teaching setting. So how do we do that? How do we translate those best practices? That's what we're going to focus on today to be effective. Because the fact of the matter is this: good instruction always, 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 always is about us, the teachers. If it was about the technology tool, then we would have gone to that years ago, because quite frankly, pragmatically, it's less expensive to do than to run school buildings. But it really is about teachers and what we do as educators, as teachers, for our students every day. So the big picture, what we're going to focus on is concepts. How do we develop those concepts in an e-learning setting? And then our content, and then skills. Of course, we're going to have skills, and then relationships. We know how critical relationships are. Relationships have come back into fashion recently, just like longer skirts and skinny ties. And we keep talking about relationships with our students. And, those of us who are teachers and have been teachers for an extended amount of time know that all great teaching begins and ends with those relationships. And we have a significant body of research that supports that as well. But how do you do that? And I know a lot of colleagues that I know know, a lot of educators are particularly squirrely about that right now, because at least in March, we knew our students, right? And now we don't. We're going in and we may have not met our students. So how do we develop that in an e-learning or digital learning or virtual learning, distance learning kind of classroom? So here's way number one. The first thing is curriculum and instruction will differ in an e-learning context. It just does. So one of the things that I've been doing, I kind of look at this as the year of the sabbatical that I didn't ask for. So what am I doing to be productive and sharing my work and being, quite frankly, supportive of my teacher colleagues? We've been asked, not by choice, but because of the context. And this is classic kind of thing for teachers, for educators, for principals, district leaders. This is kind of classic. There's a crisis and it's educators who rise to the occasion, right? And in my perspective, and what I keep saying over and over again, the district leaders, the principals, instructional coaches, teachers have been nothing but heroic during this pandemic. And I've worked in school districts where there's been a hurricane, or wildfires or something else, and it's the teachers who really are the glue to hold together to communities. So our curriculum and instruction is going to differ in an e-learning context. So I want everybody to just kind of breathe about that. So the way that you thought of things, in a traditional setting is going to differ. So I'm going to go back old school. I'm going to go old school with you right now, and let's look at Bloom's taxonomy. Whether you use Costas, if you're an avid teacher or you're familiar with avid, or if you use Marzano's taxonomy or you use DOK, it doesn't matter. It's really about this triangle. And I like to use Bloom because I guess I'm a traditionalist in some ways, or I like to be retro, but I love the simplicity of what he has and with the continuum. And we need to keep thinking about this too. We want our kids on that apply, analyze, evaluate, creation kinds of levels. And then again, how do we translate that into that e-learning context? And I'm going to show you how. So building an instructional plan on an e-learning platform, the first thing is on the left, that's your traditional kind of classroom. So we're going to identify learning outcomes and targets. Okay, we're teachers, we're educators, we know how to do that. Got that. And then, but on the right-hand side is what we're going to do in an e-learning platform. So we're going to identify what national and state standards are going to be addressed in that particular lesson. What is most important? And those are things that we do anyway as teachers. So we look at those objectives, those learning targets, and we identify the skills and information that the students will learn and how they're relevant. And that's where that student-teacher interaction comes in. That student-teacher interaction is going to be different in an e-learning environment just by the nature of it, of the context. One of the things that's been very difficult for me as a teacher, as an educator, is when I'm doing webinars like this. Because I can't see you, because I'm not reading body language, it's very, very challenging. So I always depend a lot on the chat, quite a bit on what folks are saying in the chat area, to make sure that I'm in tune with what's going on. I also watch too, like, are people coming in and are they staying or are they leaving the webinar? Because that's going to give me a cue as well. So those kinds of body language or those cues are going to be different. One of the things that I think is brilliant, and I've started doing that with my online meetings, is have the kids at, you can give the kids as part of like a course packet or materials that you email, whatever learning management system that you use, is maybe have them do cutouts. And if they have a question or they have a comment, so we can see each other right on the screen, they can raise that card, like I have a question or I have a comment. And I've started doing that in my virtual meetings that I have, rather than folks trying to interrupt because or interject or something, because it's very challenging to do in this kind of setting. And then information shared, demonstrate relevant information, right? Of course we want that, but this is what it looks like in e-learning. We have the advantage of using multimedia like videos, documents, images, websites. I have some of the most awesome resources for this. You see, again, I'm an educator, so I use the word awesome, but multimedia like videos, documents, images, and websites. Smithsonian Institute in their Learning Lab, go to Smithsonian Learning Lab. They have done an absolutely epic job on creating curriculum during the COVID-19 pandemic, to the point where it just lays it out like, here's week 1, week 2, week 3 for all grade levels, kindergarten. I think they even go down to pre-K all the way through 12th grade. They have STEM, social studies, ELA, everything that you would want. And all of these like multimedia videos, documents, images have been vetted. Okay, that's number 1. And number 2 is that they're all bundled together. So that is an awesome resource. And another one that I've become kind of a fan of, I wasn't originally, but since the pandemic, I really like what they're doing, is Khan Academy, in particular for mathematics and science, but they have all subject areas. So instead of us trying to curate all of this, because just depending on a textbook and an e-learning environment, it's not good in a traditional classroom, and it's especially not good in an e-learning environment, that we need to use these kinds of resources. So go check that out, Smithsonian Learning Lab. I think you're going to be just thrilled with some of the things that you see. And then how do we check for kids understanding, right? So virtual office hours are really great, or having a help desk and then asking questions, pausing. Liz and I are going to be doing that at certain points during the webinar. That's something that I've learned in a virtual learning environment, is I've got to stop and chunk things at certain points just to give everybody a breather, because the delivery and the learning in this kind of format is actually really, really intense. It's intense to teach this way, and it's intense to learn this way. So we're going to chunk. And of course, we know from the neuroscience that when you chunk instruction, kids are going to be more likely, or any learner, they're going to be more likely to internalize it. So virtual office hours, giving kids opportunities to share what they know and understand through conferencing. One of my favorite tools for that is Flipgrid, if you don't know about Flipgrid. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on. Every single Web 2.0 tool or app that I recommend in this webinar and other things that I've done has 2 requirements. Number 1, it's free, or it's very close to being free. And number 2, it's very quick to get up and running on it and be effective with it, because time is always a challenge for us as educators. And those virtual office hours, it's very easy for us, especially since we're working from home, to start mushing together those boundaries of, here's my work life, here's my home life with my family. So one of the things that I've gotten, I'm still working on it, I'll admit to it, is that I make sure that at 4:30, I start wrapping up my work. At 5 o'clock, it gets shut down. I don't check email. I don't go online. I shut it down. And that's my time with my family. And the same thing on the weekends. On Sundays, it is shut down. I don't check email. And it's hard for me. I'll admit to that, because I'm a bit of a tech junkie too. And then activities, those learning activities. So we provide a task and explain it thoroughly, no matter what, if it's e-learning or it's a traditional classroom, and provide students with the opportunity to collaborate. Now, I realize that this is kind of tricky depending on what platform you're using. So we want to make sure that in an e-learning environment, we've explained the activity. Having a video of it is great, especially for our English language learners, because then you can close caption it. And our students who are have special needs, we can close caption it. They can replay it over and over again if they need to. But we have that explanation of the activity, our direct instruction. And then we want to make a checklist for the students as they engage in that activity and they're completing the tasks, making sure that it's really concrete and as detailed as you can possibly make it. And then summary, that's that reflection, okay? So giving kids that opportunity to reflect on their learning, we also call that metacognition, right? So how do we give those kids that opportunity and provide kids with feedback on their work while they're working? That, more than anything else, is one of the biggest influences on student performance, is that on the spot descriptive feedback. And descriptive feedback is not in a letter, and it's not in a number. It is actually, here's what you've done well, this is what you need to build. And we're actually going to talk about that next week on next week's webinar on grading and assessment. So that's a little plug for next week. All right, so moving along, let's talk about some tips for classroom management. Of course, we all saw, like all over the place, that Zoom conference calls were getting invaded by outsiders, and how to lock that, and the security of these things. And those were all things that we had to learn the hard way as we were moving along, because this happened literally within 48 hours where everything just shut down. So here are some tips from classroom management. This is based on my own experience, what I'm reading about, and then also with teachers, with colleagues, with educators just like you. So here are some tips for classroom management. The first is, and this is true in a traditional classroom, is set expectations and monitor submissions. A lot of our learning management platforms like Schoology or Canvas or Google Classroom, you can do that. You can have deadlines, and you'll have lists of who sent it, who didn't. You can automate emails to send out. And that's, of course, if the kids read the emails, but monitoring those submissions. So we want to make it's really easy for kids in an e-learning environment to miss deadlines, because it's out of sight, out of mind. When I turn off my computer, my teacher's not there. I can just shut it down. I can shut the technology down, and I don't have to pay attention. There was one teacher who was telling me that on Zoom, the student figured out how to change, like when you show up on Zoom, and like right now we have Liz there and it has her name, the student changed his name to Connecting. So he would log on and it would seem like he was always trying to connect. And what he did was change it. Those crafty middle school kids. But it's those kinds of things that we're learning about, right? So kids are great at these kinds of things. This is what I found too, also at the college level. I was a professor for 15 years at the university level. And my experience when I started teaching some online classes as long as 20 years ago was the first time I taught an online class, is that I had to remind folks of deadlines about 5 times more than I did when it was a traditional classroom. And I'm not sure what it is. I just think it's just like you turn the computer off and it's like just not registering, right? So we want to make sure that we remind the students much more than we would in a traditional classroom. And then creating those routines. Again, routines are really critical. So we want to have routines for assignments and activities. So for example, if an assignment is due on Monday, you can tell the kids, okay, you can expect your feedback on Wednesday in a designated time window. It's really, I cannot emphasize this enough. Create boundaries. Here is my time. So for me, generally, what I do is I try to make sure that my students always have, they know that, at 4:30, I'm going to change. I just heard in my headphones that the battery's running low, of course. So I might run out of battery. So we'll see how this goes in a minute. I might have a little hiccup. That was my distraction. Okay, now here's the next thing too, providing that timely communication with students. That descriptive on-the-spot feedback is most effective. But we want to keep an environment, an online environment, where we're providing that feedback to students within one school day during school hours. I'm going to say it again, during school hours. Most of us, not only are we doing work from home, but we're also parenting our children from home as well. So during school hours is when you provide feedback. A teacher that I know, she had told me that she was really surprised at how much her middle school students actually are doing assignments and doing work at 1 o'clock in the morning. And they would email and almost expect her to respond to them right away. So make sure that you're responding during school hours. Even if you see that email outside of school hours, respond during school hours and set those limits, and make sure that you communicate that to your kids and also the parents too. And then the other thing too is that you might want to include parents in on that conversation. So if you're doing like office hours or having descriptive feedback, why not invite the parents to come in if they want to come in? And I would ask them to let me know ahead of time if they are, because those dynamics always change, right? And we want to make sure that we're make sure that the office hours, that we're respecting privacy, those kinds of things too. So there's other things to consider. I'm gonna stop right here for a moment, Liz, and see if we have any questions. And I'm gonna do something with my headphones here too.
All right. Well, we do have some questions. Let's see here. We have one that says, you mentioned earlier about a checklist. So should the students have the checklist in front of them as you teach, or is it used as they complete assignments on their own?
It's actually both. So I think you can do either one. So it's almost, some folks say, oh, you mean like a rubric? No, I mean like a checklist, like you need to do X, Y, and Z by this date. So that can be done while I'm doing large group instruction or direct instruction. The kids can have it, but also making sure that they have it so when they're working independently, they have that checklist. One of the things that I do when I have kids work in centers is that this is one of my biggest tips. Make sure you write out the directions. I mean, that seems like kind of like, but when kids run into trouble and they start getting off task, it's because they're not clear of what they need to do. So those detailed instructions are really, really critical. And hold on a second, I'm gonna grab my book. I'm gonna show you what I mean. So like in the back of, in the back of like my books, I give like examples of that. So this is what I'm talking about. See, it's very, very clear. Here's like part 1, part 2, part 3. And that's what I mean by a checklist and really spelling it out for the kids. The other thing too is like color coding it when you can, like this guy. Again, when you color code it too, it helps the kids chunk it too. Like I do this first, then I do this, then I do this. When we mush it together in a paragraph, it makes it really hard for ELL students and also kids with special needs, but our neurotypical kids need that too. So yeah. So that hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, and kind of along the same lines, somebody wanted to know if you could say more about the cutouts you referred to towards the beginning. If you can kind of speak to those a little bit more in depth. Why do you suggest using them, and what was the
The
context again? The
visuals.
cutout, the visuals, right?
Yeah, because, okay, so as we're talking like this and I'm talking and talking and talking, okay, Liz, we're going to do a little improv here. Liz,
Okay.
I want you to interrupt. Okay. And scene. So I'm going to be sharing something, but then you want to
Dr.
interrupt because you
McKnight,
want to add
Dr.
something.
McKnight,
And then we're both talking at the same
hello?
time. And
I
I
have a
got 30
question.
people on here at the same
Oh,
time. Oh, I'm sorry, Liz, did you have a question? And then
yeah.
you have like 5 other kids interrupting. So instead, now it's your turn, Liz, you talk, and then I'm going to cue you. Okay.
Okay. Well, we
And
have
scene.
so many questions coming in about various aspects of what you've already presented. So yes, Dr. McKnight, you have a question.
I have a question. So that's what I mean. Because we got to count on those visual cues a lot because, we're like Muppets. You can only see us from like the shoulders up. And how do you do that? So that's what I mean. So, if you just go and get some like clip art, I'm sure some teacher on Pinterest has already done it, and just giving them cutouts. Like I have a question or I have a comment, or I can't hear you, or my connection's not good, or something like that. And the kids have those. I wouldn't do more than 3. They get 3 and that's it. Because then if they have too many, it gets overwhelming. So
It sounds in a way, it sounds like the E version of like the red, yellow, green. I've seen the red, yellow, green
mhm.
index cards or cups in the cafeteria or something like that, just so that there's a quick visual for the teacher to check in on where the students are in terms of their understanding. So, and you're right, I'm sure there's already some sort of blueprint out there, people who may have already created them on Teacher Pay Teacher or Pinterest or something.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one more. Well, we have actually a lot more, but we'll do one more now and they'll save the rest for later. When it comes to reminding, you say that we have to remind people about deadlines way more than we would when you were in a traditional environment. So how much is too much in terms of reminders? Nicole says a lot of parents complain about too much email. So how can we remind the kids in a way that will be seen?
I think that schedule is really important. It's important for all kids. I think sometimes we tend to think that it's not as important when we get to older grades, when we start getting into like fourth, fifth grade, middle school, high school, that we don't think that we need those kind of patterns. Um, but actually, we all kind of thrive on that, right? So, for me, I have a schedule that I've started to work towards too, and it helps me to be more efficient as well as, a 54-year-old woman, right? But so as far as reminding, if you have a regular schedule, like Monday is when assignments are due, Wednesdays is when you have feedback, Thursdays is when I have office hours between this time and this time. That's really going to help the kids to self-regulate. And so making sure, so it's not just reminders, it's reminders and routines. So, as far as the reminders, yeah, the email gets overwhelming. I posted on my private Facebook page earlier this week. I'm like, I hate email. I'm just like so done with it. And because it just makes me crazy. So, organizing that and maybe helping parents to organize those emails. But if you're using that learning management system, that really is what that's about too. So kids can see this is due, that's due. And we want, and this is the same thing that we were working, kind of struggling with in a traditional setting, is having kids take the initiative for what they're responsible for. And it's almost like rescuing it. If we keep reminding them, yeah, we do need to remind them, they do need that. However, there comes a point too where, are we enabling or are we reminding them? So as far as a magic number, I don't have a magic number, because I think it depends on who you teach, what you teach, where you teach, right? So, but I think a friendly reminder of, hey, it's Thursday. Remember that on Monday assignments are due, and I expect them in the whatever Dropbox or whatever we have at this time. And Wednesday you're going to get your feedback. And if they're missing it on Monday, then I send an email out right away and say, this was due, and I see that you don't have a submission. You need to get that turned in. And that's something we're going to talk about next week. One of the things that's happened with the pandemic is that challenges and issues in education that have always bedeviled us are under a magnifying glass in a way that they never have been before. So equity, accessibility, and grading in particular, we know definitively that letter grades, number grades are actually a very poor system. We know that from the neuroscience, yet we hold on to them because it's familiar. And so what's happened is that a lot of school districts, they've been looking at this and saying, okay, what do kids really need to know? And how do you measure that? Is it about compliance, or is it about, do you know the skills and do you know the content? So it becomes about a conversation about mastery rather than compliance. So I don't want to give away too much about next week, but we're going to talk about that too.
Great. And before you take it back over to continue, we have had a couple people say they're doing a hybrid model. And
Yep.
so as we go throughout, if there's anything that you can do to speak to those who are going to be living like in both worlds next year and trying to function in that
Yeah.
way, that would be much appreciated. And very quickly, the name of the book that you held up to show the color coding, what's the title of that book?
The title of that book is Literacy and Learning Centers for the Big Kids. And it's available on you can get it on Amazon, but go to my website because it'll be a better deal for you. So it's KatherineMcKnight.com and go there. And that's also the book that if you're tweeting, that's what I'm going to be handing out as freebies. So don't forget to tweet. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh.
Awesome.
Yeah. See, teachers love books.
I already own it. So, and recommend
There you
it.
go. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we're going to let you continue if you're
Okay.
ready, and just a reminder to reshare your screen when you're ready to go.
Thank you for the reminder. Okay, so the other thing too, let me say this too. Those of you who are teaching in a hybrid, okay, I think that's the hardest model, quite frankly. So I want everybody to be too. And, so if we're talking about schedules and routines, like let's say Monday, you're in person, Monday and Tuesday, you're in person, Thursday, Friday, the kids are on their own. What I know what most schools are doing, they're usually doing like either a Wednesday or Friday is for teacher preparation and conferencing with students. So it's not going to change all that much, but I would really depend, like when your kids are with you, that is going to be really about, if you think of like gradual release of responsibility, that's going to be a lot of the I do, we do. When I'm giving them novel skills, novel content that I know that they're going to need support, that I really need to do that in in-person instruction. And then when the kids are doing distance learning, virtual learning, e-learning, that's when they're doing the practice. So that's, I think, is going to be most effective in those kinds of circumstances. I want to talk about some high leverage instructional tools and practices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are out there that I have found and other colleagues have recommended to me. So, a lot of it is about sharing platforms. For the littles, I really like Seesaw a lot. I think you can get up and running on that pretty quickly. So it's a platform for student engagement, letting kids create, reflect, share, and collaborate. And remember that like third slide on Bloom's taxonomy, we know where that is on the pyramid, right? That's up higher. So we want to give kids those opportunities to share and collaborate. And teachers that I know who use Seesaw really like it. There's kind of a following, a bunch of groupies on it. And they're able, on that website, kids are able to show like what they know using photos, videos, drawings, PDFs, links, all kinds of things. And then an advantage of Seesaw is that all of the student work is in one place. So it makes it easier for us to share with families, and then also sharing it with the teacher as well. It also provides an easy way for teachers to create and share, for students to explore and complete assignments. So it's just a great kind of management software. I know many of you are in schools where, maybe they use Google Classroom, they'll use Schoology, they might use Canvas, some are using Seesaw. So, and then I know other districts too, where they don't have those resources and they don't have a platform that's using across the whole district. So Seesaw would be a good one to use. It does have free access. So that's the good thing. And during COVID-19, a lot of these companies have just opened things up as well, and are offering a lot that used to be behind the paywall. They're offering it in front of the paywall. So a big shout out to their community for that. Nearpod, I also like. I think Nearpod is better for older kids, probably fifth grade and up. And it's used to engage kids through interactive kinds of activities. So, we know how important collaborative learning is. So it gives those opportunities for collaborative activities, collaborative discussions, and then also formative assessments. So we're not relying on quizzes and tests all the time, that we can start, including those formative assessments. And then as a teacher, I can share an interactive lesson with the students, and I can involve videos, drawing games, virtual field trips, and more. And for those virtual field trips, again, that Smithsonian site rocks. And then also National Geographic is really good for that as well. And then most major museums, like in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, all over, the United States, all over the world, the Louvre in France also has great educational resources and virtual field trips as well. Actually, on the Louvre one, the virtual field trip, you might actually get to see the Mona Lisa. I mean, I was kind of shocked when I was there, how hard it was to actually see the painting because there were so many people. And then ongoing assessment on Nearpod is usually gathered as students work through the lessons and the activities. So you can make it systematic too. So that's also something else that I really like about Nearpod. And again, my thing is, can I get up and running on this quickly? There are some Web 2.0 tools or apps that are very popular, and I won't mention those, that I started tinkering with them, and I just found them to be really cumbersome, and I'm like, it just went through the trap door. One of the things that I've been playing with, yesterday I started playing with Doodly, and it's basically to make animated explainer videos. And after about an hour, I was pretty quickly up and running on that. So that's kind of my measure. Once I tinker with it for an hour, I look back and I'm like, what was I able to do or produce or create? So Nearpod is also another one. Okay, very briefly about grading and assessment, and we're going to go into it much more deeply next week. So I hope you're going to join us, because it's not just about grading and assessment in a virtual environment, but it's also about that too in a traditional one as well. And I think actually that's one of the positive things that can come out of this crisis, is that it is re-examining. It's really forcing us to re-examine some of our habitual practices and thinking of better ways, more effective ways that we can do them. So the goals of grading and assessment, let's remember that the goal of grading is to evaluate individual student learning and performance. Okay, that's what grading is defined as. And then assessment, the goal is to improve student learning, hence formative assessment. So formative assessment is never ever formative assessment unless you're adjusting instruction based on your data and your feedback. So I'll see benchmark assessments and then nobody actually does anything with it. And I'm like, well, that's really not assessment or formative assessment if you're not changing practices. Okay. So to clarify, grading can play a role in assessment. But remember, when we assess kids, it's not to put labels on things. It really is designed to respond and adjust instruction in order to meet student need. Okay. So both graded and ungraded artifacts, student artifacts of student learning, like assignments and classroom activities, are often used in assessment. And here's something else too, is that assessments should be triangulated, and they should also be reliable, varied, and fair. So, and this is one of my big things, especially when I'm working in school districts and we're looking at big overall assessment systems. When I say varied, it means we're not always doing written three-part essays or multiple choice questions. We have multiple ways of kids to express what they know and understand, what they've mastered so far of the content and the skills. So it needs to be varied. It needs to be fair, meaning that we all have our different strengths and weaknesses. So we want to make sure that things are fair. So to give you a really kind of quintessential example is that, I oftentimes argue that there's no such thing as a fair reading comprehension assessment. And the reason why I say that is that your background knowledge or your schema has a tremendous impact on your comprehension. And so Dan Willingham, really important cognitive psychologist who specializes in reading comprehension, a study was conducted that he cites in his book, The Reading Mind, where there's two groups of readers. One group are identified as lower level struggling readers based on a reading comprehension assessment, a standardized reading comprehension assessment, yet they're experts in baseball. Group two are identified with the same reading comprehension assessment, standardized assessment, as high-level readers, but they don't have much background in baseball. The kids, both of these groups, are given a reading comprehension test that is about baseball. And you probably know where I'm going to go with this. The kids with the lower reading ability but high knowledge, extensive background knowledge on baseball, significantly outscored the students without the background in baseball and were higher performing readers. This study has been duplicated multiple times, this experiment, and it comes with the same results, and not necessarily baseball. There's one about the Vietnam War, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's my point. A kid from New York who's reading a reading comprehension assessment, and the subject is on the subway system, is going to have an advantage over a kid from Texas who lives in ranch country, and so we have to make sure that our assessments are reliable, varied, and fair. Really, really critical. I would argue that who is the best assessor of his or her students' mastery of skills and content? It's us. It's the teacher, because we're the ones who are with the kids every single day. So, big assessment data, I'm not negating the importance of it. It's great when I want a big picture and I want trends. But when we're talking about individual students, that grading, so the goal of grading is to evaluate student learning and performance. It contributes to that assessment. Okay. So here's one of the things that you might be familiar with are proficiency scales. And Marzano has really popularized proficiency scales. And you can see that it's different than a rubric, because a lot of times colleagues will say to me, hey, Katie, how's a proficiency scale different from a rubric? Well, here's the difference. A rubric is more of like buckets that you have to fill criterion. And I'm not saying don't use rubrics. There are times when you do want to use rubrics. But when we're looking at kind of a whole unit, or like a sequence of like a chunk of instruction that's 2 to 3 weeks, we want to look at the overall mastery. So this is an ELA example, and the topic is expressive language. Now, it's not intended to be this way, that 4 means A and 3 means B. You got to get out of that mentality, even though a lot of schools, a lot of districts that I see use proficiency scales will translate them that way. But what it really is about a progression. And so when you look at those simple goals, it's like follow simple directions involving 2 stems, uses short sentences to share information about people, places, and things, and uses precise descriptive language such as adverbs and adjectives. Well, when you think about Bloom's taxonomy or DOK or whatever, that's a very kind of basic level of understanding. But then when you go to complex, you can see that there's a deeper level, that it gets to that application level, that creation level. So I'm sharing information. I'm telling a simple personal narrative. So the idea is that you have your power standards. Those are usually in your complex goals. So, and just a reminder that power standards are the must-have. So when Common Core first came out, and I know that many of you are from states that don't use Common Core, but when Common Core first came out, and whether you have Texas or Indiana standards or Florida standards, we don't teach every single standard, because there's these power standards. So I used to refer to it as the core of the core. If you look at ELA, there's basically 8 standards out of all of them that are the power standards. So for instance, like writing 1, which is evidence-based argumentation, and there's so many chunks to that, pieces to that. Some of the things about punctuation and conventions, and using language and vocabulary, that feeds into that. So they don't necessarily need to be separate. So when you look at proficiency scales, we're looking at the big power standards, and then the simple goals show like I'm kind of like emerging mastery or developing mastery. But when I get to the complex goals, I've secured mastery, is the way to think of it. And why is that important? It's important because when we're doing virtual learning and traditional classroom learning, what do we want kids to be able to do? What do we want them to know? What do we want them to be able to do? And that's really the focus, rather than how many assignments they've completed. So, is doing that important? Yeah, I'm not negating the importance of that. But if a kid already has it mastered, why do they keep needing to do that? Is that about compliance? And it's not necessarily the best use of their time either. So with math teachers, we have this conversation all the time. If the student knows how to do the first 3 problems, why are they doing another 20? If they've got it, move them on to something else. And what's good with the proficiency scales is that it allows for that. It allows that progression to happen, so we can differentiate for our students as well. The districts in which I've worked in, or the schools where we've developed proficiency scales and implemented them, the student performance went off the charts. I cannot speak enough to this about the role of this. The other thing too, as far as descriptive feedback and conferencing with my students online, if we have this proficiency scale in front of us, and I say to the student, I want you to show me, where you are on this. Kids have those conversations, and I've done that in classrooms just like yours, and we can do that in an in an e-learning environment too. Here's a proficiency scale. This is how we feed into it. We're going to go more into that next week in the grading and assessment webinar. Okay. if you want to know more about the proficiency scales, I've actually have them developed from pre-K all the way through 12th grade for English language arts. Just email me and I'd be happy to extend that conversation. Let's talk about descriptive feedback and what descriptive feedback is going to look like at a hybrid virtual. So we do this all the time with our students. We're always talking to our students. So providing that good descriptive feedback and checking for student understanding, which you can use the proficiency scales as a tool for that, is really that key to effective instruction. This, more than anything else, it also contributes to our relationships with our students too, is just a definitive factor in our students' success. Okay, so descriptive feedback plus student understanding, that equals effective instruction. All right, so here are some resources. It's a little overwhelming, this list, and it's in your handout too, the link. NWEA or NWEA, which I know some folks call it that, has created an impressive list of tools. And most of these are for formative assessment, and most of them are online. This is a fantastic list that to share with you. So it's e-learning resources for descriptive feedback and how you can give descriptive feedback in e-learning and hybrid situation. In addition to that, when the pandemic happened, I started developing a lot of my more popular professional development into courses that teachers can use, and where they can learn more. So if you want to go more in depth as far as, you know, creating effective and engaged learning, where I go more into like learning management systems like Seesaw and Canvas and stuff, and then also specific tools for descriptive feedback, you can take a look at that course. And the link for that too is also in your handout as well. And it's a 15-hour professional development course that you can do. But here's probably the most important slide of the afternoon. All right, except for my West Coast folks that are kind of late morning still. The impact of reading is that, I keep saying this ever since the pandemic happened. Don't so much worry about what Web 2.0 tools and what apps you're using. Reading, more than anything else, is the most critical factor, okay? A student who reads just 20 minutes a day is going to be exposed to 1.8 million words per year and is more likely to score in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. And very recently, I realize I just have a typo there too. Standardized tests is what I should say, not texts. But the other thing too is that if a student reads 60 minutes a day, they're more likely to score in the 98th percentile. How do you get kids to read more? You get kids to read more by giving them texts that they want to read. That's the secret sauce. So, you know, one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of Saddleback is that they're really committed to that high-low and just getting books in the hands of kids who are going to read and make them readers. And we're naturally curious by nature, and reading is just such a great avenue for that. I also want to give a shout out too to the importance of reading paper books as opposed to electronic. What the research is indicating in the last 3 to 5 years, couple of things. Number one is students who take reading comprehension assessments on a screen score lower than if they were given the same assessment in a paper-based. And what we're finding is that what we tend to do as readers is that when we read on a screen, we tend to skim. We skim more. But when we have a paper-based text, we don't. But there is a difference, because when you read textbooks and informational texts, there really is a substantial difference between paper-based and electronic reading. We do better with the paper-based, but when we're reading narrative text, if I'm reading a novel for fun, there isn't as much difference between the two. And a lot of that stems from the fact that when you're reading for information, you're flipping back and forth. You read with a different intensity than you do when you're reading a narrative text. So reading is the most critical thing. If you want too, if you go to my website, katherinemcknight.com, I have differentiated book lists that are organized around an essential question. And they're grouped that way. So for instance, like, what are the limits of friendship? And I have 10 texts there. So you can be assured that they've been vetted. So, you know, they're books that I would feel comfortable as a teacher having in my classroom or my children reading. Number two is that they have the text complexity grade band that I use. And then number three is, as I make sure that I represent as much as I possibly can gender as well as ethnic diversity, and also regional diversity as well. So you can go check those lists out. So you can you can go to katherinemcknight.com and check those out. So I'm going to go back to where we started, and remember that when we're talking about effective e-learning, it's about concepts. What concepts am I teaching my students? It's about the content, it's about the skills, but most importantly, over all of those, it's about the relationships, the conversations that I have with my students, the descriptive feedback that I give them, the routines that I give them. That's what sets them up for tremendous success, whether they're in distance, virtual, e-learning, hybrid learning, or traditional classroom. That's the secret sauce. So before we take additional questions, and I do mean this from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you do on behalf of students every day. Our profession is a noble one, and my heart is just so full with what is expected of us moving forward. So you have my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if there's a question that you have that we don't get to today, or you're interested in a particular resource and you can't find the link. I'd be happy to help you out with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before we move to Q&A, we always like to let everybody know what's coming up next week, which of course, Dr. McKnight is returning next week. I'll show you that slide in a moment. But while we are transitioning over to Q&A, Dr. McKnight mentioned that the secret sauce is reading. And making sure kids have materials that they want to read so that they stay engaged. So while we're coming through questions and getting ready to move formally to the Q&A, if you could go to the chat, we're curious, just let us know. What are your kids reading? How are they accessing books during this time? How are you getting reading material to them? When you think about, hey, I need to make sure that my kids have something good to read, how are you approaching that? Let us know in the chat. And we will go to our slide to plug Dr. McKnight for next week, where she will join us again, same time, same place, to talk more about grading and assessment for the modern classroom, which nowadays includes e-learning. As she said, we have an opportunity to hopefully address some things that were not working by now engaging with e-learning. So grading and assessment for e-learning and the modern classroom. We hope you'll join us. You can go to our website to register, or you should, if you haven't already, gotten an email prompting you to register, so you can respond to or click on the link in that email as well, and get yourself registered so you can join us next week. So now we're going to talk questions. Let's see what people have going on in the chat here. I see, oh, they're loving your presentation.
Yay.
All right.
I just put a link in there too for the differentiated book lists. And I know that, you know, we did a webinar on that a couple, you know, but like 2 months ago on differentiated reading, and it's on your YouTube channel, I think. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I want to get into that because I know it's like, you know, there's a lot of friction on that. So go check out that webinar, but the differentiated book lists are there. So
yes, and they're very valuable, very great resource. Definitely check it out. In terms of what your kids are reading next year, I see some people are using iLit. Let's see, reading chapter books over Facebook, sending out ebooks to kids who have internet access. Raz Kids, Mac and Via, ReadWorks, Tumble Books, those are all very popular. I see, will the presentation be archived? I got kicked out at one point. Don't worry, Heather, this presentation will be on our YouTube page, so you can go back and catch the portions that you missed. Sorry that happened. That's no good when that happens. We have people using Common Lit and Newsela. Public libraries are still closed, so schools, okay, yeah.
Yeah, if I can speak on some of these things, like, Newsela, Common Lit, da 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 da. Okay, so I must speak on this.
Okay, okay.
I can't help myself. It's about pages read. Pages read always wins. So think of that in your head. Pages read always wins. Many teachers I know, and many of you are going to say this, like I know this is going to ring true for a lot of you. It's stamina, right? Kids hold it together for a couple of pages and then they fall apart, right? So we want them to develop stamina and fluency. So how do we do that? They gotta read more pages. They gotta. So that's what we really that is just a critical thing. So I'm not saying that those things are not important. They absolutely are. But consider using whole works with your students and getting those. I know a lot of schools too, that when they're distributing the lunches, via bus routes and things like that, many of them are starting to put together book bundles. That just I can't tell you how happy that makes me to get books in the hands of kids and encouraging them to read. You can do book clubs, things like that in e-learning quite easily. Flipgrid would be a great vehicle for that, where you can have grids and kids are responding to a particular novel or topic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we got to get to some of these other questions here. I got so wrapped
Mhm.
up in looking at what people were using to get reading materials. Let's go back to the hybrid model for a second, because we've had a few people kind of chatting back and forth with fellow attendees about what their hybrid model looks like. Of course, there are various definitions of that.
Mhm.
And we had one attendee who said that her hybrid model is she's teaching face-to-face students every day, and then another group who is online. And then it seems some people are doing simultaneous, like they'll have kids in front of them and then kids connected in online. But then we had an attendee chime in and say that for her hybrid situation, she will be using Seesaw daily, both in person and in our virtual learning days. And they're doing that for consistency. And I just wanted to chime in on this. And then Dr. McKnight, see if you have anything to say. Through my role here at Saddleback, I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of different people in a lot of different districts. And I would say that seems to be common, is that there are a lot of places that are doing hybrid, but whether you are in person or at home on any given day, you're still accessing and completing assignments through Seesaw or whatever the platform is. And I don't know how that will work in practice, but I think it makes sense just from a sanity perspective. If I'm a teacher, I have one place where I'm putting assignments.
Mhm.
But in the event that I need to shut down, everybody knows how to use the technology. So
Exactly.
I just wanted to highlight that conversation, because I think a lot of people are struggling with how to manage the hybrid situation. And I kind of feel like the most sensible approach is that whatever platform you're using for e-learning,
Mhm.
your students, when they're in person, they should be using that to whatever extent possible, to
Yeah.
make sure that everybody is consistent and on the same page. So just wanted to address that and give you a second to see if you wanted to add anything to that.
I have nothing to add on that, except a hear, hear, woo, woo, amen. Because, yeah, and because our profession is complicated enough, right? What we do is highly complex, and then we have this other layer on it. So I so appreciated what you said too, Liz. Is just I think that's just we don't know what's going to happen. And that's the thing. We didn't know what was going to happen in March either. And yet we kept responding to it and doing the best we can. So if we can create that kind of consistency with that, when I'm in person and doing, in a traditional setting, I'm still using my learning management platform and such, and really teaching kids to develop some independence with that too. And that's a self-regulation piece. So we want kids to have, that independence and that responsibility of learning. So we don't want, to them to come in a classroom and think, oh, now I can't learn because I'm in an e-learning environment, or it's going to be more difficult because the teacher didn't tell me to do X, Y, and Z. Let's get them to the highest level of independence that we can, for our children. And no matter what, if they're in the classroom with us or they're in that e-learning environment, that hybrid situation, it's about our relationships too with kids. That is so key. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned that is also underneath all this conversation is that we're still in a pretty traumatic time, and I don't use trauma lightly. We're coming from that. We're experiencing it every day, as the adults, but also our children, and being really trauma sensitive to that, as well. So, those of you who are in that hybrid situation, I think that is super challenging. But Liz, what you just said, that is probably the best advice that I think anybody could offer right now.
And surely I hope a lot of districts who haven't figured that out yet, will maybe hear that lots of other districts are doing the same thing, and maybe will borrow that idea, because I think it just seems to make the most sense. Who knows, in another 6 months, I might learn more information and it turns out it wasn't a good idea, but for now it seems to make the most sense. Um, Going back to this idea of relationships, we've had several questions come in that I think tie back into this idea of relationships. One was about developing and setting expectations for how this all is going to work. And the other was ideas for engagement with some of our more challenging cases, particularly maybe special ed and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So lots of different comments coming in about teachers wanting their maybe specific context being addressed, like I'm a special ed teacher, or this is all new,
Yeah.
how do we best set expectations? And I suspect both of those things go back to relationships, but I wanted to let you speak on that.
Yeah, I think so. And this is all new for all of us. And I want to add too that, I'm a parent of he's not a child anymore. He's 19, and my son has autism. And he actually attends a boarding school in Pennsylvania, and they shut down, just like everybody else did in March. We literally had to go and get him. He was 900 miles away. We had to go and get him and bring him back home. And one of the things that his school did, it took them a while to figure it out, because what they're doing is a lot of life skill kinds of things. And again, with my son, with his disability too, he thrives on routines. So once his school had established those routines, my son is like, okay, if I'm supposed to be online at 9 a.m., I am online at 9 a.m. on my Zoom, and that's it. Not 9:01, not 8:59, at 9. And that's part of the charm of his disability. But, the routines helped him tremendously. He looked forward to just having that time. They had a morning meeting before he went into his other classes. And again, it was just, let's get together and say hello. And his teacher usually played a song, and the kids had the lyrics if they wanted to join in and sing along as well. His reading teacher, like in the middle of the day, there were a couple of times, because she uses a lot of movement, with the reading. And all of a sudden I hear my, 19-year-old son, boom, 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 in his bedroom. And he's mimicking, or copying the what his teacher is telling him to do. But it was established routine and the expectations, and all of our children need it. but our kids with special needs in particular, they thrive on that, of just knowing what the next thing is going to be. So, and I always say this too, when we make accommodations, all children benefit from accommodations, but our kids with special needs must have them. It's like air, it's like oxygen, but all kids benefit from that. All of us benefit from routines, right? So, so that's kind of, you know, my overall suggestion too. And visuals, again, those visuals, taking advantage of closed captioning when you can, recording sessions, chunking things, all kids benefit that from that, but our children with special needs in particular. And remember, behavior is communication. And you know, I get frustrated too, just like any other educator or parent. But you got to take a deep breath. What are they telling me? What's the communication? So if a kid is saying, you know, connecting on Zoom, why is he or she doing that? Why is that? And so getting beyond the compliance, but having that conversation of like, hey, so I noticed you're doing that. Why you're doing that? And you know, kind of calling them on it too. And again, it's those relationships and those conversations that make the difference.
We have a couple more questions. There were a couple people who wanted to know about the proficiency scales, if they're available on a certain website, or is there a certain place they could go and look for them? Or will we
Yeah.
get into that more next week? Or
We can get more into it next week, but I will post that link right here because I have my website up on this side. So I will send that to you right now. There's a coupon there that you should use for 50% off, and I'll put that on there. It's back to school is the coupon code. So I just sent that, and
perfect.
each one of those is about 45 to 50 pages, you know, so it would be every single proficiency scale that you would need for that whole year. And I know other companies and such charge literally thousands of dollars for that. And I decided to make all of my material pretty accessible and affordable because I want every teacher, every school to have access to it.
Hmm. Thank you for that. And this one, I love this question, and we're going to close out with this one.
Okay.
Tanya Lee says she thinks this might be a little bit off topic. I actually don't think it's off topic. I think it's actually right on topic, especially when it comes to establishing routines and expectations.
Mm-hmm.
She would like to know, what are your thoughts around requiring that students are dressed, no PJs, and sitting up as would be required if you were in brick and mortar? I mean, this is happening. I'm hearing stories of this all over the country. There's a district locally who is putting that out in terms of dress code, and people are in an uproar.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts around that, particularly as it relates to everything you just presented around routines and expectations and relationships?
Amen. Woohoo, woo woo. You know, when I wear pajamas because I'm relaxing and I'm going to go to bed. When I'm working, I'm dressed a certain way. You know, I joked with Liz yesterday when we were doing our practice run. I'm like, "Don't worry, I'll be dressed professionally and I'm going to have makeup on." So, you know, because I'm in a professional role right now. And right before we came on, I was like fixing up my office so it didn't look like a mess, right? Because that's an expectation and I'm in my role as a professional. So yes, set that expectation with students, that you expect them, you know, the same code that you would have in school for dress code, that's expected when you're online. Professionals do that as well. You know, I'm sure you've heard too that a lot of department stores and companies are finding out that tops are outselling bottoms, like something like 6 to 1, because as I said, we're all in our like Muppet, you know, you can only see us from the shoulders up. So everybody looks great from the top up, but they have their jean shorts on the bottom, right? And so, yeah, I think that's really important in setting expectations. And let me just say this, as far as setting expectations, I'm going to give you an expectation. I really, really want you to honor those boundaries and really make sure that when you're off contract or whatever at 4 o'clock, I know we all take things home as teachers, but I really want you to honor that right now. The most successful teachers teachers, of course, are the ones who plan, are well rested. And Gerald's online today too. He can probably attest to it. But with my MATs, when they would go into student teaching, I said, here is the most important thing that I'm going to tell you right now. And they're like, okay, that I should prep, and stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, no, you need to go to bed at a regular time. Anybody that owes you a favor, it's time to cash in while you're student teaching. Somebody wants to do your laundry or pick up a meal, you let them do it. And as teachers, we're such givers all the time. It's hard for us to receive. So really, I cannot emphasize that enough. Make sure you set that boundary and the email goes off. And we're only good for our students if we're well rested and we have our sanity.
Amen to that. Well, we actually have gone overtime
We
today, but
did.
that's all right. We wanted to get as many of these questions answered as possible. That way we can just kind of pick up and continue right where we left off next week. So, I have to actually say one more thing before we close out. If you are a teacher or if you know a teacher who is just excellent and needs an opportunity to get out there and share his or her ideas and skills with other adults, we are always looking for great educators, teachers, practitioners, leaders who have something that they want to share to a wider audience. Our Saddleback webinar platform is certainly open. So if you or somebody if you think you know somebody who would be great for presenting and sharing fantastic information with teachers, please let me know. Liz@sdlback.com. Where, like I said, we're always looking and we want to hear from you. We know how valuable it is for you to hear from your colleagues. So thank you for joining us. You can reach us on social media. We're on all the social media platforms, right? YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, pick your favorite, find us there. Same thing with Dr. McKnight. Please find her on Twitter. She's going to go through those the three best tweets, right?
The
So
best tweets.
Yeah, she'll be looking for the 3 best tweets about this webinar to have people win some free books. So
Free swag.
that's right. Thank you so very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everybody.